I made the drive on a Thursday afternoon, 2 hours through countryside I used to love. The hills were brown and quiet, and the radio played songs I didn't really hear. I had a casserole dish wrapped in foil on the back seat, a pecan pie in a box from the bakery on 5th Street, and 2 wrapped gifts in a bag for my grandchildren, a book about dinosaurs for the older one, and a soft lamb for the baby. I had been planning this trip for 3 weeks. My son had called me on a Sunday morning, the way he sometimes does when he wants something and hasn't figured out how to ask for it yet. He started by asking how I was feeling, whether my knee was still bothering me, whether I'd had a chance to get out and walk now that the weather had cooled. I answered every question. I always do. Then he told me they were doing a proper Thanksgiving this year, a real one, he said, the kind with a full table and a house full of people, and that he wanted me there. He said his wife had been working hard on the planning, that the kids were excited, that it wouldn't feel complete without me. I told him I'd be there. That was the last time he called before Thanksgiving Day. I pulled into their driveway at 2:30 in the afternoon. There were already 4 cars I didn't recognize parked along the street. I sat in my car for a moment, reorganizing the things I was carrying, telling myself it was just a big gathering, that this was fine, that families grow and change and that's a good thing. I told myself that a lot on the drive over. I had gotten fairly good at it. My daughter-in-law answered the door in a dress I hadn't seen before. Her hair was done. She looked beautiful and polished and slightly distracted, the way she always looks when she is performing for a room. She hugged me, the kind of hug that involves shoulders but not warmth, and told me to come in, set my things down anywhere. Anywhere turned out to be the kitchen counter, where my casserole ended up beside 3 other dishes already arranged on a buffet-style setup. Someone else had brought pecan pie too, I noticed. Mine stayed in its box. There were 11 adults in the living room when I walked in. I knew my son. I knew my 2 grandchildren, who ran to me immediately and wrapped themselves around my knees, which helped. I did not know the other 9 people. They were my daughter-in-law's family, her mother and stepfather, her 2 sisters and their husbands, her college roommate, and her boyfriend. My daughter-in-law made introductions quickly, the way you rattle off names at a party when you're already moving towards someone else. I smiled at each person. I remembered none of the names. My son came and kissed my cheek. He smelled like the cologne he's worn since he was 19. He said, "Glad you made it, Mom." And then, someone called him from across the room, and he was gone. I found a chair near the window, and I sat down. For a while, I watched. That's something I've gotten better at over the years, watching. When you get older, people stop expecting you to perform in every room, and sometimes that's actually a relief. The grandchildren came and sat with me, and we whispered about dinosaurs, and I told them about the gifts in the bag, and for a little while, everything felt warm. Then my daughter-in-law's mother sat down across from me. She was a handsome woman in her late 60s, silver-haired, very sure of herself. She asked me how far I'd driven. I told her. She nodded the way people nod when they've already stopped listening. Then she said, "My daughter tells me you've been having some health troubles." She said it gently, the way people say things when they want to establish hierarchy without appearing cruel. I told her my knee had been acting up, but that I was managing fine. She nodded again and turned to speak to someone behind me. Dinner was served at 5. The table had been extended with a folding section at the far end, and that was where I was seated between my daughter-in-law's younger sister, who spent the entire meal on her phone, and an empty chair that belonged to her brother-in-law, who kept getting up and down. My grandchildren were at a separate children's table in the kitchen. My son sat at the opposite end, next to his wife, laughing at something her stepfather said. He caught my eye once across the length of that table and raised his glass in a small gesture that might have been a toast or might have been an apology. I ate slowly and quietly. The food was good. I drank 1 glass of wine and then water. I answered questions when they were directed at me, which wasn't often. After dinner, my daughter-in-law stood and made a little speech about gratitude. She thanked everyone for coming. She thanked her mother for helping plan the menu. She thanked her sisters for bringing their families. She thanked her husband, my son, for being the kind of man who makes her feel safe and loved. The room applauded. He took her hand. She did not mention me. I looked at my hands in my lap for a moment. Then I looked up and smiled. Because that's what you do. That's what I've always done. Later, While the women were clearing the table and the men had gathered in the living room, my daughter-in-law came into the kitchen where I was washing dishes. She stood beside me and was quiet for a moment. I thought she might say something, thank me for the food, or for coming, or for the gifts the children had torn open with such enthusiasm earlier. She had seen the dinosaur book. She had seen the soft lamb, which the baby had immediately pressed to her cheek. Instead, she reached past me and turned off the faucet. She said, "My mom is going to need the guest room tonight." I turned and looked at her. "They weren't planning to stay over," she continued. "But it's getting late and the drive is long, and honestly, it just makes more sense. You understand." She smiled the way she smiles when she has already decided something and is only informing you as a courtesy. I asked her where she was suggesting I sleep. She gestured toward the living room. "The pullout is actually very comfortable. My sister slept on it last Christmas." I dried my hands on a dish towel. I kept my voice very even. I said, "You invited me here, sweetheart. You asked me to drive 2 hours and bring food, and I've been here since mid-afternoon." She said, "I know, and we love that you came, but Mom really can't drive that distance tonight, and she's getting older," and she stopped. Seemed to realize what she had started to say. Adjusted. "It's just one night. It'll be fine." I didn't say anything else. I folded the dish towel and set it on the counter and went back to the table to get my glass of water. My son found me on the back porch 20 minutes later. It was cold out, but I hadn't wanted to be inside. He sat down next to me in one of the plastic chairs, and for a while neither of us said anything. The yard was dark, and the light from the kitchen window made a yellow square on the grass. He said, "I'm sorry about the room thing." I told him it was all right. He said, "You know how she gets when her family is here. I told him again it was all right. He was quiet. Then he said, "We actually wanted to talk to you about something. About the trip we've been planning, the one to Portugal." I had heard about the Portugal trip. He had mentioned it in passing 2 months ago. A 2-week trip he and his wife were planning for the following spring, their anniversary. I had been glad for them. I had not been invited, but I had been glad for them anyway, because that's also something I do. He said, "It's expensive, more than we budgeted for originally." He said this carefully, the way he says things when he is setting up for something bigger. And with the mortgage going up this year and the kids' school, I waited. He said, "We were hoping you might be able to help contribute. Just something. Whatever you could manage." I looked at him in the low light. He was 51 years old. He had a good job. He had a house. He had a wife who wore new dresses and planned elaborate Thanksgivings. He had 2 healthy children who were asleep inside. I said, "How much are you thinking?" He named a number. $3,000. I didn't react. I've gotten very good at not reacting. I said, "Let me think about it." He seemed relieved by that answer, which meant he had already anticipated what he would say if I said no, and this was easier than that. He patted my hand once, then went back inside. I sat out on that cold porch for another 15 minutes. The yard was still dark. The kitchen light went off. I could hear voices inside, winding down, the soft sounds of a house settling into the end of a night. I thought about the last 3 years. I thought about the $4,000 I had given them when the water heater broke and they didn't have the money. I thought about the $1,200 I had lent when my daughter-in-law wanted to take a certification course, a loan that had never become a repayment. I thought about the Sundays I had driven over to watch the grandchildren when they needed a date night, the birthdays I had not missed, the school events I had attended alone, sitting in gymnasium bleachers with other grandparents while their parents were running late or running behind or running from one thing to the next. I thought about what it costs a person to keep showing up for people who have stopped counting the cost. Then I went inside and I slept on the pull-out couch in the living room. The next morning, I woke before anyone else. I made coffee in their kitchen. I knew where everything was because I'd helped them unpack it when they moved in 3 years ago. I sat at the kitchen table and I watched the light change through the window over the sink. When the baby cried upstairs and then went quiet, I assumed my daughter-in-law had gotten her. I finished my coffee. Before I left, I went into the living room and I found my purse. I took out the small notebook I carry and I wrote a number at the top of a blank page. $3,000. I looked at it for a while, then I wrote the other number underneath it. $4,000. $1,000. $200. $640 from 2 Christmases ago when I bought the children's bunk beds. $380 for the anniversary dinner last year that I had offered to host at my home. $2,100 from the year before when my son needed help with his car. The list took up half the page. When I added it up, the total was $14,820. I folded the page and put it in the front pocket of my purse. Then I left a note on the kitchen counter, just a small one, thanking them for having me, telling them I'd see them soon. I carried my casserole dish, still mostly full, and the box with the untouched pie, and I put them in my car. I drove home in the thin, gray light of the morning. I didn't cry on the way back. I had decided not to. When I got home, I made a pot of tea and I called my financial advisor. Her name is Carol, and she has known me for 20 years, and she does not waste time. I told her what I needed. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "All right, let's go through it." We spent 45 minutes on the phone. When we were done, I felt something I couldn't quite name, not relief, exactly, and not peace, but something that sat close to both of them, like a window being opened in a room that has been closed too long. I also called my attorney that afternoon. His name is Raymond, and he is the kind of man who speaks in complete sentences and never sounds surprised. I told him I wanted to revise my will and my estate documents. I had some changes in mind. He said he could see me that Thursday. I said Thursday was fine. My son called on Sunday. He didn't call to ask how the drive home had been, or to thank me for the food I'd brought, or to tell me the children had asked about me. He called because he wanted an answer about the $3,000. I listened to him explain again about the Portugal trip, about the costs, about the timing. He used the word investment at one point, which I thought was interesting. He said it would be an investment in their marriage, in their well-being, in the family's happiness, and that sometimes you have to prioritize those things, even when it's hard. I waited until he was finished. Then I said, "I've been thinking about it." He said, "And?" I said, "I've been thinking about a lot of things, actually. I've been thinking about how much I've given to you over the past several years." I named the number, $14,820. I heard his breath change on the other end of the line. I kept going. I told him I'd added it up. I told him I wasn't saying it to punish him or to keep score. I was saying it because I had needed to say it out loud to someone, and he was the right person to hear it. There was a very long silence. Then he said, "Mom," I said, "I'm not going to help with the Portugal trip." Another silence. He said, "I don't understand why you're being like this. It was one uncomfortable night. You could have said something if you were upset." I said, "I'm saying something now." His voice shifted. It got tighter, the way it does when he is working himself towards something. He said, "You've always done this. You make everything about yourself. You sit there and you let things build up, and then you explode and expect everyone to feel sorry for you." I didn't say anything. He said, "She was right. My wife has been right about you for years, and I kept defending you, and I don't know why I bothered." I let that land. I let it sit there between us on the phone line for a few seconds, and I noticed what it felt like, and I decided I was not going to carry it. I said, "I love you. I love your children. Nothing about that has changed, and nothing will, but I'm not going to keep showing up as an afterthought. I think you know that's fair." He said, "This is unbelievable." I said, "I'll talk to you soon," and I ended the call. I made dinner that evening. Roast chicken with potatoes and the green beans from my garden that I'd put up in jars in September. I ate at the table with the good dishes, the ones I usually save for company. I poured myself a small glass of red wine. I lit 2 candles, not because it was a special occasion, exactly, but because I had decided to stop waiting for one. Thursday came. I sat across from Raymond in his office with its shelves of orderly books and its view of the parking lot and its absolutely reliable sense of quiet. He went through the documents with me, one by one. I had thought carefully about what I wanted, I had written notes. Some things I left as they were, some things I changed. When we were done, Raymond slid the papers across the desk, and I signed where he pointed, and I felt that same unnamed thing from the phone call with Carol, the window, the fresh air. Raymond said, "Is there anything else?" I told him no, that there was nothing else, that this was exactly what I needed. I drove home in the October light, past the hills I used to love, which I still loved, actually, past the bakery on 5th Street, where I stopped and bought a small apple tart not for anyone else, just for myself. When I got home, I put it on the good plate with the blue border, and I ate it at the kitchen table in the afternoon sun, and the house was quiet in the way that a house is quiet when nothing in it is waiting for permission. My daughter-in-law texted me 3 days after the phone call. The text was brief. It said that she didn't appreciate how I'd spoken to her husband, that I had upset him, and that she thought we needed some time and space before we saw each other again. She added that she hoped I understood. I read the message twice. Then I put the phone down and finished folding the laundry I'd been doing, item by careful item. Shirts laid flat, edges aligned. I did not respond that day, or the day after. On the 3rd day, I wrote back and said that I understood, and that I hoped she and my son were well, and that whenever they were ready to talk, I was here. I sent the message, and then I went out for a walk because my knee had been feeling better, and the afternoon was too nice to waste. The weeks that followed were strange in the way that any new kind of quiet is strange when you've been used to noise. I missed my grandchildren acutely, the way you miss something with your whole chest. I called once and left a message. I sent 2 cards with small drawings on the envelopes. A dinosaur on one, a lamb on the other. I don't know if they received them, but I also noticed things I had not noticed in a while. I noticed that I was sleeping through the night without the low-grade anxiety that had been my companion for longer than I wanted to count. I noticed that when Sunday mornings came, I didn't reach for the phone with the particular combination of hope and dread that I had come to associate with my son's calls. I noticed that the rooms of my house felt like mine again, the kitchen, the little sitting room with the chair by the south window, the garden that had needed attending for 2 years while I was busy attending to everyone else. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. I am not naturally talented at it, and the instructor is a cheerful woman named Dolores, who encourages everyone with equal and indiscriminate enthusiasm, and on Tuesday evenings, I sit at a folding table with 8 other people, and I make small, imperfect paintings of flowers and birds, and once, memorably, a bowl of fruit that looked more like a geological event. And I have never been happier to be bad at something in my life. My son called 6 weeks later, not on a Sunday morning, on a Wednesday evening, which meant something had changed. His voice was different. The tightness was gone, and what was underneath it was something younger and less certain, something I recognized from a long time ago. He said, "I've been thinking." I said I was glad to hear it. He said, "I think I owe you an apology." He said it slowly, like someone reading from a page and not sure they're pronouncing everything right. A real one. Not the kind where I explain all the reasons why things happened the way they happened. I sat down in the kitchen chair, the good one, by the window. I said, "I'm listening." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thanksgiving was wrong. The way things went, the room, the you being there, and nobody really—" He stopped. "You drove 2 hours and you brought food and you came because we asked you to come. And we treated you like you were just filling a chair." His voice cracked very slightly on the last word, and I heard it, and I held it carefully. I said, "Yes." He said, "I've been thinking about that list you mentioned. The money." He paused. I didn't know it had gotten that big. I don't know why I didn't know that. I think I stopped seeing it. Stopped seeing what it cost you. What things cost you. I looked out the window at the yard, at the garden that was bare now in November. Its raised beds empty and waiting. I said, "It's not about the money." He said, "I know." I said, "It's about whether you see me." There was a long, honest silence on the line. Not the defensive kind, not the kind that is really someone gathering arguments, the kind that means someone is actually sitting with something. He said, "I see you, Mom." I didn't rush to answer. I waited until I was sure I meant what I was going to say. Then let's start there, I told him. That's where we start. We talked for a long time after that, longer than we had talked in years. He told me things I hadn't known. His wife was struggling in ways she hadn't been showing. The marriage was harder than it looked from the outside. He had been trying to manage everyone's needs for so long that he'd stopped noticing when he was taking the easiest path at my expense. He said that plainly, without softening it, and I was grateful for the plainness. I told him things too. I told him that I had spent years adjusting myself to fit into whatever space he left available, and that I had done it willingly at first, and then out of habit, and then out of something closer to fear. Fear that pushing back would cost me more than it was worth, that speaking up would mean losing him. I told him that I understood now that staying quiet hadn't protected anything. It had just delayed this conversation by several years. He listened. That was what mattered. He actually listened. Before we got off the phone, he said, "Can we have dinner sometime? Just us? Before the holidays?" I said yes. I told him I'd like that very much. I didn't tell him about the changes I'd made to the will. That wasn't relevant to the conversation, and it might not ever be. What I had done with Raymond on that Thursday afternoon wasn't a punishment or a threat. It was a decision I had made for myself about how I wanted my life to be organized and what I was willing to carry forward. Some of those decisions might change, some might not. That would depend on what we built from here. But I had learned something that October, sitting in a cold kitchen before dawn with my notebook and a cup of coffee and a list of numbers that added up to more than I had wanted to acknowledge. I had learned that the people who love you don't always see you, and that being seen sometimes requires you to stop quietly disappearing into the corners of their lives and stand somewhere they can't avoid looking. I am 63 years old. I have worked and saved and shown up and given and adjusted and accommodated, and I have done all of it because that is what you do for people you love. I would do it again, but I have learned, or perhaps I have finally let myself remember, that I am also a person standing in the middle of my own life, not at the edge of someone else's. And there is a difference between giving from fullness and giving from fear. I had spent too long confusing the two. The watercolor class meets again on Tuesday. This week, Dolores wants us to try landscapes, a sky, a tree line, some suggestion of distance. I have been looking out at my backyard trying to figure out what I want to paint. The garden is quiet now. The raised beds are covered with burlap for the winter, and the rose bush along the fence has been cut back to its canes, stubby and purposeful. It doesn't look like much right now, but I've been tending that garden for 11 years and I know what it holds. I know what comes back. I think I'll paint that.